In the year 73 AD, atop a plateau that rose 400 meters above the Dead Sea like a throne carved by angry gods, 960 Jewish rebels looked down upon their doom. Below them stretched the camp of 15,000 Roman legionaries, the finest soldiers the ancient world had ever forged. For 3 months, those rebels had watched Rome's engineers work with the patience of men who knew that time itself fought on their side. Sheer cliffs protected every approach. A single narrow path wound upward, so steep and treacherous that a handful of defenders could hold it against an army. They had food enough for years, cisterns filled with precious water, weapons stockpiled for siege. They should have been safe. Geography itself was their fortress. But then, the Romans built something that defied every principle of warfare known to the ancient world. A wooden tower, 26 meters tall, higher than an 8-story building constructed in the desert, without modern tools, without cranes, without anything but Roman determination and engineering genius that bordered on madness. This single invention would change the nature of war itself and reshape empires. This is the story of how timber became more powerful than stone, how mobile wooden monsters ended the age of impregnable fortresses, and how innovation triumphed over geography in the most impossible siege ever attempted. By the time you understand what the Romans accomplished at Masada, you will see why defenders across the Mediterranean world surrendered at the mere sight of construction beginning, why entire civilizations fell before they ever raised swords, and why 960 souls chose death over facing what rolled toward them on wooden wheels. The mathematics seemed impossible. The engineering defied logic. Yet there it stood, a monument to human ingenuity and human horror intertwined. For 1,000 years before Rome's engineers changed everything, the equation of siege warfare had remained brutally simple. Cities hid behind massive stone walls, 10 meters high and 3 meters thick. Defenders rained arrows, rocks, and boiling oil upon anyone foolish enough to approach. Attackers died by the thousands in the killing fields before the gates, their bodies piling like cordwood while the city watched from safety above. Sieges dragged on for months, sometimes years. Entire armies withered from disease and starvation, their supplies exhausted, their morale shattered, while defenders remained comfortable behind their walls. This was the bloody stalemate that had defined warfare since humans first learned to stack stone upon stone. Height meant power in the ancient world. Stone meant permanence. Walls meant safety. Great cities like Tyre, Carthage, and Jerusalem had endured countless sieges precisely because defenders held every conceivable advantage. They possessed supplies stockpiled during peacetime, shelter from the elements, and the elevation that allowed them to rain death upon attackers while remaining safely beyond retaliation. Attackers faced exposure to weather, mounting casualties with each assault, and time that bled their resources like an open wound. Rome had conquered vast territories through the discipline of its legions and the superiority of its tactics, but prolonged sieges posed a problem that threatened the entire imperial system. Every month spent camped outside city walls meant vulnerability elsewhere. Rebellions sparked in distant provinces. Enemies gathered strength, while Roman attention focused on a single stubborn fortress. Gold flowed away like water. Men died of disease more than combat. The mathematics of empire demanded speed, but ancient siege warfare offered only patience measured in seasons. Enter the architecti, Rome's military engineers. These were not warriors in the traditional sense, but problem solvers, men who approached obstacles with calculation rather than courage. They studied mathematics and physics, observed how structures failed, and innovated relentlessly. While common soldiers saw walls as barriers to be overcome through valor and blood, the architecti saw engineering challenges requiring elegant solutions. They calculated, they designed, they experimented. The catalyst for revolution came during the siege of Jotapata in 67 AD, where Vespasian, a general who would later seize the imperial throne, watched his legions bloodied repeatedly against Jewish fortifications built on hilltops. Traditional methods achieved nothing but casualties. Ladders propped against walls became killing grounds for defenders above. Battering rams could not reach fortifications constructed on cliff edges. Time favored the besieged. Frustration mounted. But within Vespasian's command structure worked an engineer whose name history has forgotten, but whose idea would echo through centuries. This anonymous genius approached his commander with blueprints that seemed to violate reason itself. The proposal was audacious. Build upward to match the defender's height, then surpass it. Construct mobile towers, wooden structures on wheels that could be pushed directly against enemy walls, protected passages rising higher than the ramparts themselves, delivering Roman soldiers onto the very battlements that had seemed unreachable. The concept would turn the fundamental advantage of defensive height against itself. Vespasian, a practical man who valued results over tradition, saw possibility where others saw madness. He approved construction. Everything that followed changed the nature of warfare. The anatomy of a Roman siege tower defied belief when you truly considered what ancient engineers accomplished without modern tools or material science. Picture a wooden building, square at its base and tapering slightly as it climbs skyward, rising 20 meters minimum, often much higher. Multiple fighting platforms existed within this mobile fortress. The ground level housed a battering ram suspended on chains, swinging with devastating force against whatever structure stood before it. The second level contained archers firing through shuttered windows that protected them from return fire while allowing them to rain death upon defenders below. The third level packed assault troops, shoulder to shoulder, waiting in darkness for their moment to surge forward. The fourth level served as an artillery platform for bolt throwers, mechanical weapons that could punch through armor and shields alike. And the top level held the corvus, the assault bridge that would crash down upon enemy ramparts and transform the tower into a gateway for Roman soldiers to pour directly onto the walls. But these specifications tell only part of the story. Consider what construction required in material terms alone. Each tower demanded 50,000 logs cut from forests that disappeared to feed Rome's war machine. 10,000 iron plates were hammered into armor, emptying entire mines of their ore. Leather from 1,000 cattle was treated and stretched across vulnerable wooden surfaces for fireproofing. Rope was woven and measured in miles, necessary for the countless systems of pulleys and support that made the structure functional. Wheels were carved from ancient oaks, each standing taller than a grown man, capable of bearing unimaginable weight. The logistics of gathering these materials and transporting them to siege sites represented feats of organization that rivaled the engineering itself. Meet the commanders who would wield these wooden weapons. Vespasian, the methodical destroyer, approached warfare with calculation and patience, showing mercy when it served Rome's interests and absolute ruthlessness when it did not. Against him stood Jewish zealot leaders like John of Gischala and Eleazar ben Yair, men who would choose death before surrender, who fought not merely for territory but for their people's very existence. Geography mattered profoundly in these confrontations. Jerusalem sat upon hills, its walls following ridgeline contours that made traditional siege engines nearly useless. Masada perched atop cliffs that seemed placed by divine hands to mock human ambition. Gamla clung to steep slopes where approaching armies could barely maintain footing. Traditional siege weapons, rams, ladders, catapults, could not reach fortifications that used terrain as their greatest defense. Defenders felt secure behind topography, married to stone. Then, the Romans began building on site, adapting each tower specifically to the fortress it would attack. The psychological warfare commenced not with battle, but with construction itself. Imagine standing watch on city walls and seeing Roman surveyors below, measuring distances, calculating angles, mapping every feature of the ground. Day 1 brought the clearing of construction areas. Day 3 revealed massive beams laid out in patterns that suggested monstrous dimensions. Day 5 showed the skeleton rising, frameworks that climbed higher with each sunrise. Day 10 brought walls going up, the structure taking shape. Day 15 revealed a wooden monster growing before your eyes, an impossibility becoming terrible reality. Material gathering became spectacle designed to break enemy morale. 50,000 logs arrived, dragged by teams of oxen, their passage raising dust clouds visible for miles. Daily convoys brought iron in quantities that seemed impossible for a siege camp to consume. Leather vats bubbled with treatment solutions, their acrid smell carrying to defender positions on the wind. The sounds reached besieged cities day and night, hammering that never ceased, sawing that continued through darkness, shouting as crews coordinated work shifts. This was the soundtrack of approaching death, relentless as the tide. Inside the growing towers, Something remarkable occurred as Roman engineers solved problems in real time that would challenge modern builders. Weight distribution was achieved through triangulated bracing that spread loads across the entire structure. Stability came from maintaining a low center of gravity even as the tower climbed skyward. Mobility required massive wheels with axles greased constantly, turned by crews of soldiers pushing with synchronized effort. Fire resistance came through layers of defense, iron plates bolted to vulnerable points, leather soaked in vinegar, and water stretched over external surfaces, constant vigilance against any spark. Defenders watched construction with mounting horror. Some attempted night raids, brave men creeping from gates with torches and oil, determined to burn the wooden monsters before completion. Most such attempts failed against Roman security that tightened around construction sites like a noose. Work continued regardless. The psychological impact grew with each beam added. Warriors who had never known fear in battle began experiencing nightmares about wooden demons rising from the earth. Families gathered on walls during daylight hours, watching their fate assembled piece by piece, understanding that height and stone would not save them. One defender's journal survived from the Jerusalem siege, preserved by chance among ruins. His words capture the despair. Each dawn, the Roman towers grow taller, like 3 demons of wood rising from the earth itself. We shoot arrows that stick harmlessly in their sides like bee stings against an elephant's hide. We hurl stones that bounce off iron plates with sounds like bells tolling our doom. We pray to the God of our fathers, but the hammering never stops, and the towers continue growing. The moment when Romans completed their first tower at Jotapata and began pushing it forward changed siege warfare forever. Defenders realized something that froze their blood: the building was moving. Tons of wood and iron were creeping toward their walls with the inexorable patience of death itself. Unstoppable. Inevitable. As the structure approached, its true scale became apparent. It stood higher than the walls. It bristled with iron and leather. Shuttered windows concealed unknown numbers of soldiers waiting in darkness. This was not merely a siege engine. This was evolution manifest. Technology defeating tradition. Innovation crushing ancient certainty that walls meant safety. Day 1 of the siege of Jotapata. Dawn broke across the Galilean hills, with Roman horns sounding across the valley. Then came new sounds, grinding, creaking, groaning, as the tower lurched into motion. 50 tons of wood and iron moved forward on massive wheels, advancing 1 meter, then 2, slowly but inexorably. The ground itself shook with each rotation. Defenders loosed arrows by the thousands. The sound of 10,000 shafts striking wood simultaneously filled the air like deadly rain on a wooden roof, but they stuck harmlessly in thick planks or bounced off iron plating. The tower continued its approach without pause. Inside the mobile fortress, 500 Roman soldiers waited in darkness. They heard each impact, felt vibrations through the wooden floor beneath their feet, smelled leather and sweat and the sharp tang of fear. But they remained safe, protected by engineering genius, advancing toward the moment when they would pour forth onto enemy walls. Night fell, but the siege did not pause. Defenders attempted sabotage under cover of darkness.